If you've ever thought retirement means spending down every single dollar that you've saved, here's something that's a bit counterintuitive to that. Most retirees actually don't spend as much as they could, or in some cases, they end up with more money or the same amount of money of where they started. Not because they made perfect market calls or because they're gambling with high yields, but because retirees will often underspend in most ways that people won't understand or wouldn't expect. Today, I want to walk you through why this happens, what the data says, and what to expect if you're planning your own retirement. A lot of retirement planning assumes that most people will spend their savings down over time in a fairly predictable way. And that's the whole idea behind things like the 4% rule or a safe withdrawal strategy. But in real life, many retirees behave very differently. Studies show that most retirees often spend much less from their savings than most traditional models would assume. For example, research analyzing retiree behavior found that many households will draw down a very low percentage of their assets every single year, far below the common safe withdrawal rates. That behavior can lead to outcomes that most people don't expect, and that's why retirement math on paper doesn't always add up to retirement behavior in real life. And what I mean when I say that is you can have a strategy, but if you aren't following it, then it's going to affect your outcomes in retirement. There's a well-documented phenomenon in retirement planning called the consumption gap, right? Where retirees spend less than any theories say that they should, right? Which is contrary to the popular belief that I'm going to deplete all my savings in retirement. As one research institution puts it, retirees are far more likely to spend from guaranteed income sources like their pensions or social securities than they would spend their own assets, so their IRAs or their 401ks. One study found that retirees might spend 80% of their lifetime income, but only 50% of their investable assets, even when they can afford more. This isn't just a small trend, it's real data that keeps showing up again and again. And I see it all the time in my office where I'm meeting with somebody who spent their entire life, working and saving for retirement. Now that they're in retirement, they're having trouble spending what they've saved, right? And I get the mindset. You've always been in save, save, save mode. And now you get to retirement, you have your social security. Well, let me just live there. No. You spend all that time saving, you deserve to spend some of it. And I get the argument with estate planning, I want to leave it to my kids. Absolutely, as you should. Everybody should have an estate document. Everybody should have a trust, a will, so that way, any money that they have left over is left to their heirs. But spend the money that you saved, right? I mean, your kids hopefully will work and save. You instill them with their good ideas to save for their own retirement, but spend the money, right? It's your retirement. Use it how you see fit. So it's so funny to get people into the office that don't want to spend their own money, but that's what it's there for. That's the whole point of saving, right? So you can spend it later on. Here's the part that surprises most people. Real world data shows that retirees will often spend on average 2 to 3% of their total assets, right? And if you remember what I said earlier about the 4% rule, which is general, rule to follow, that's well below the 4%. It might not sound like a whole lot, 2, 3, that's right next to 4. But if we're looking at your total asset value, that could be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that you're underspending, underutilizing in a year. A sample of retirees found that only about a third consistently take withdrawals each year. And although retirees say that they spend 80% of lifetime income, they often end up spending far less from savings, meaning many portfolios don't shrink as quickly as expected. This combination of low withdrawal rates and people not wanting to overspend often leads to portfolios that can stay steady or even grow while retirement continues. Okay, so the data shows this, but what's the why? And there are big behavioral drivers behind this. Number one is the fear of running out of money, which is, very common, right? So it's just a large majority of people don't want to outlive their assets. Okay, so it's like, if you haven't necessarily gone through a huge structure, know how much you can spend every year, don't have that confidence or comfortability in your own plan, then this is the most common thing that we see, right? You don't know how much you can spend every year, and your fear is just outliving your assets. Number two is the saver mindset, and I feel like this is the one that I see the most, which is where, you spend decades saving, right? You're working, you're putting money away into your 401k, your IRA, whatever it is, and you've always saved and you've always known to save, right? Now, it's hard to switch that mindset, right, from a saver to a spender. which is super, super common. It's actually a psychological study. But it's so hard for people to switch from being a saver to a spender and enjoying their retirement. Number 3 is income framing versus savings framing. So this basically means that, people treat their guaranteed income differently from their savings income. So guaranteed income is their Social Security, their pensions, checks that are going to be coming in every single month. They're more likely to want to spend that than they are to spend their own savings. They're more reluctant to touch their IRAs or their 401ks. These aren't necessarily mistakes, right? I mean, if your account continues to go up while you're retired, that's awesome, right? Like on paper, that looks great. But they are human behaviors, right, that affect your outcomes. So just a quick check-in. What happens when people underspend? Okay, their accounts don't tend to deplete as fast. Their accounts will continue to grow, especially if it's in a good market. And people will worry about running out of money when statistically portfolios will remain robust. This isn't just anecdotal. This is what households actually do and what researchers observe. And retirement planning isn't just, a guess into the future. It's behavior over time. And what I mean by that is, if your behavior during retirement, or not during retirement, but before retirement, approaching retirement is one way, then odds are you're going to keep on with that same behavior. Okay, so we want to make sure that we can flip that. Flip from savings to spending. So you've been underspending in your account and your savings keeps on growing. So here's the twist that most people don't expect to see coming. Underspending can be just as problematic as overspending. And the reasoning behind that is people can end up, not taking that vacation that they were talking about, right? So it's like, you get to the point where you have the money to do it, but you've never spent that much on a vacation. Even though you've talked about it, it's just like, well, we've never done that, so let's just save it instead. And they don't go on that vacation. People also end up underutilizing assets when they can afford to use them. Okay, so, if you have the assets there and they're there for you to spend, use it, right? Don't lose it, use it. People also end up paying taxes later in life when they could have optimized them earlier, right? And that's kind of my biggest gripe with all this, underspending, saving too much or not spending enough, is you're going to end up paying taxes on the money, especially if it's pre-tax. Well, only if it's pre-tax. If it's Roth, then, this isn't necessarily an issue. But if you have a lot of pre-tax money and you're not spending it, you're just leaving that tax burden for your estate, okay, for your heirs. So you might as well just spend it, especially if you have the opportunity to spend it. Often the fear of running out of money creates its own cost, right? So not spending can be just as expensive as spending the wrong way. So what's the takeaway? Retirement planning isn't just planning out how much you save. It's about understanding how much you spend and why. What's the why? What's your why? Why do you save for retirement? I mean, that's the big question here. And part of that puzzle is recognizing that people are going to be cautious in retirement. And that caution can lead or can affect their outcomes. Sometimes in ways that, often leave them wealthier later on, but not necessarily happier, right? Does that make sense? If you're nearing retirement or in retirement and you see this pattern, ask yourself, am I spending based on fear or reality? Am I letting guaranteed income do all the heavy lifting? Or do I have a spending plan based on my life and not just a withdrawal rule? Because the data shows that spending behavior matters just as much as financial returns do. Most people plan their retirement through spreadsheets, tools, and models and rules, but what actually happens is a behavior story, right? Am I going to keep on spending like I spent while I was working? Am I going to keep on saving? What are my spending habits? What's my behavior like when it comes to spending the money that I save? Understanding that behavior and planning around it is one of the most important shifts you can make before retirement. If you want help thinking through your strategy, there's a link below. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. No pressure, no sales tactics, just conversation. Thank you for coming to this episode of Tommy 2 Cents. I'm Tommy Warner. Take it easy.